Hello, folks. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania once again. Now, I'm making an unusual video today. This one's a response video to a comment posted on my website. Now, the comment isn't intended to be malicious or dishonest. The gentleman's just expressing his true feelings. Now, this response video is in no way an attack, a personal attack on the gentleman. I believe it's a gentleman. And the reason for making the video is not to embarrass, but to simply point out how the false teachings and the misleading history that is taught to people or that they believe in can be so disruptive and dishonest. Now, this is in response to a gentleman named Nehemiah Fredericks was complaining about Thomas Sankara and how Thomas Sankara was killed by Americans. Well, that's factually incorrect, and he offered no evidence to support that. I pointed that out. And then he put comments in the chat, which he said didn't show up in the chat. I didn't see them later as I was doing an interview. However, given that he did a lengthy post in response, I thought that it would be fair to share his comments and my rebuttal to his questions and comments here. So with that, let's go ahead and get started here on what Mr. Fredericks had to say. Again, not a personal attack, simply an opportunity for people to learn from this discourse. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started on here. He said, "You say I'm not being factual when I say Cape Town is not segregated and the DA hasn't failed on every metric when it comes to my people." Well, my people is an interesting comment, but we'll leave that for now. That's not exactly what I said. I said that he was being unfair and disingenuous when making such a claim. It's disingenuous to blame the Democratic Alliance for the things that he's upset about. Now, if he was upset about poor service delivery, and he said that explicitly, and gave a location and what the service delivery failure was and how long he's been dealing with it, then we can have a conversation. But broad statements really don't help anybody. Now, he said, both of my families have been dispossessed from our land and were thrown in the Cape Flats. Now, that's a shameful crime, but what does it have to do with the Democratic Alliance? Is he claiming that the Democratic Alliance stole the land? That's impossible. The Democratic Alliance didn't even exist before apartheid ended and the ANC took over governance of South Africa. So yes, it's unfortunate and shameful that your families were dispossessed, but blaming the Democratic Alliance is just dishonest. 75,000 plus land claims were filed between 1995 and 1999 in South Africa. By the early part of this century, nearly 74,000 of them had been settled. Now, in most cases, claimants took the money that the ANC offered, vice fighting for the land itself. Now, I asked him, were your claims filed in that period? If so, what was the outcome? Later, he does respond to that, but not with full information. Mr. Frederick says, Group Areas Act segregated Cape Town, which is still visible today. Well, yes, it did cause racial segregation beyond what already existed at the time, much more. But the law was passed in 1950. The Democratic Alliance did not exist. It never existed until after 1994. He says, I know people that have put in land claims for over 20 plus years. My response is that you are a unique company. There are almost no valid land claims remaining. Nearly all of them are rural land, not urban land. If someone refuses to reach settlement by choice, then the land issue festering for 20 years is a consequence of their actions. The land claim process ended nearly 25 years ago. Zuma's fraudulent second window and 141,000 claims, many of them fraudulent, simply created a mess and harmed South Africa. Whites didn't pay market value for those properties, and land, which they now privately own, was a gift given by the Group Areas Act. Now, my question to Mr. Fredericks is, where do you get this information from? Do you have access to the title deeds, the land transfers, sales, or is he simply making a statement of what he believes to be true, which is more likely the case? The fact that land was taken and stolen from people in District 6 doesn't mean that the people occupying it now were given that land. That's a false assertion, one based on race hustling and nonsense. And let's not forget, District 6 was a multiracial district, primarily colored, but also black and plenty of whites living there too who were dispossessed. We are never getting that land back if we follow the failed willing buyer, willing seller model. You want us to accept that? Never. Well, that was the agreement to end apartheid. That was the deal, that this would be settled in this fashion. Apartheid ended in no small measure because of the agreement that no land claims before 1910 would be discussed. Now they're reneging on that. But we will never accept that. Well, that's your prerogative. But blaming actors who had nothing to do with the injustice is dishonest. The national government, run by the ANC since 1994, not the provincial or metropolitan governments, control the process of land restitution. That is the sentiment shared by most Black people, especially the younger generation. Now, that's a bogus sentiment. The younger generation have not had land stolen from them. Shall the Trek-Boer descendants demand cattle and compensation from the Zulu and Ndebele for their depredations, murders, rapes, and thefts? Of course not. Such positions are ludicrous, as are his claims that younger generations will never accept something that never happened to them. At some point, you need to stop claiming victimhood and stand up and excel on your own merit. He asked the question, have you ever been to Dunoon, Hanover Park, or Khayelitsha? Well, Dunoon, indeed I have. Strange thing, though. He keeps mentioning past injustices under apartheid, but then conflates events. Dunoon did not exist under apartheid. No one was moved there involuntarily. The area was surveyed in 1996 by the ANC, not the Democratic Alliance. Formal housing was built there by the ANC. Then other people flooded into the area illegally and set up shacks. That's not the DA's responsibility. It is also not the responsibility of governments to provide housing. That's an idiotic communist concept. It is even more bizarre claim to blame a political party for people invading land and occupying it, building dangerous informal settlements. Those folks came from somewhere. They were not placed there by apartheid or by the DA. Hanover Park, well, no, I've never been to Hanover Park, but I have driven past it many times, just never visited. No reason to visit it. Khayelitsha, well, yes, I have been there. Now, Khayelitsha was established in 1985, but at least 30,000 people were already living there when they set it up. Today, there are over 500,000 people living in Khayelitsha. Most of them were not brought there by apartheid nor by the Democratic Alliance. When folks voluntarily relocate themselves to slums, when they reproduce with no viable means of supporting offspring, blaming others for their condition is not a reasonably accurate story to tell. The conditions are appalling. The DA failed those communities on every metric. Yes, the conditions are appalling, but blaming others for one's own failures is simply dishonest. Where is his blame for the ANC? They ruled the Western Cape for many years until the DA took over about 15 years ago. But they get a free pass for their failures? I don't think so. I don't expect you to understand, as America is also a product of colonization and slavery. And there we have it, folks. The ad hominem attack, because he has no valid argument. He simply wants to vent his anger at the wrong folks and chooses to insult me, as if that adds any weight to his weak argument. The U.S. is a product of the most successful collection of minds gathered in a single place at a single time, focused on liberty and human dignity. A group of people who lived in an imperfect world where every existing country was the product of human colonization, conquest, and slavery. But they were the first to establish a means in law to protect liberty, end slavery, and extend protections for natural rights. This is the true story of America's founding, not the racist lies and false narratives so often espoused by poorly informed and indoctrinated Black supremacists and their liberal white fellow travelers. There's nothing you can teach me about the Black experience in Cape Town. Well, to be fair, Mr. Fredericks, I didn't make any such offer. That said, it appears there is much I can teach you about South Africa's history and the truth. Now, comments like his make a person sound like a DA supporter when they simply point out the facts. However, that is not even remotely the case. I'm not a DA supporter. I'm an independent journalist who has called the DA to book on many issues. The DA has much to crow about in the Western Cape, and it has much to be blamed for as well. But the arguments made in the Post have less to do with the Democratic Alliance than with the writer's misplaced anger and desire to wallow in victimhood. We all have horrible, miserable, shared miseries and injustices from the past. Look what my Irish ancestors went through being enslaved in the Caribbean. Buck up and take responsibility for yourself and make the world a better place. I want to thank Mr. Fredericks for the feedback, and please continue to share his thoughts. And I encourage people to share their thoughts. Keep the ad hominem attacks out of it, and we can have a lovely conversation and get to where the truth in the matters are. Well, there you have it, folks. Rare that I do this, but I decided to do this one here because just far too many assertions are made that are simply not based in fact. Cape Town is a consequence of many things, but it is not a consequence of DA failures. It is a city that existed since the 17th century. And many people are responsible for its development and for its shortcomings. To blame the Democratic Alliance for all the ills and woes of Cape Town is simply dishonest and disingenuous. Clearly, the Post, the writer, does not like the DA, and that is his prerogative. I don't like the ANC. They're a cabal of thieving kleptocrats. who've claimed false mantle of liberation when they did virtually nothing to bring liberation to South Africans. Others did that. The Pan-African Congress, Steve Biko, Black Consciousness Movement, the Black Sash Movement, international sanctions. And the real reason apartheid ended, it was unsustainable with the collapse of the Red Menace. The Rui communism ended, and so did apartheid. That's the reality. It wasn't the ANC that brought you freedom. It was circumstances and an unsustainable system of injustice. That's the true history, not the fantasies of black supremacists and white liberals who seek to lie to people and divide us based on race. We're all Homo sapiens. If we weren't, you couldn't sleep with someone and produce offspring. But funny thing, we can do that. So stop breaking people apart by race. Stop blaming people for your own failures. Step up, put your big boy pants on, and get busy building and creating a better world. Thanks a lot, folks. God bless.